I wonder if, since it's such a small group, we should do introductions.
I was just thinking the same thing.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Do you want to start, Jordan, and we can just go around, or?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Jordan Latham, and I live in Rochester, and I'm the Director of Advocacy and Resource Development at the YWCA in YWCA Southeastern Massachusetts. And our organization is dedicated to the elimination of racism and the empowerment of women. And our home office is in New Bedford. So I will now pass it to Frances.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Frances Kearns. I live in Mattapoisett. I'm a member of the ORR District School Committee. I'm also a quality manager for Philips Healthcare. And one of the things that Philips Healthcare does is improve lives, and we do that across the globe, and we work in underserved communities as well. I'll pass it to Kyle.
My name is Kyle DeSico Carey. I live in Mattapoisett too. I'm the president of the board at the Mattapoisett Museum. It's a small local history museum. In my day job, I'm the senior reference archivist of at the Harvard Planning Office. And our business is education. I don't know if you've never heard of Harvard. It's oh, I'm sorry, Sarah.
Oh, hi, my name is Sarah Thomas. I also live in Mattapoisett. I am an associate professor of education at Bridgewater State University. And I primarily work with students who are going to become middle school and high school teachers. And I'll pass it to Stacy.
Hi, I'm Stacy Hess, and I am a native of Mattapoisett and also spent 10 years in New Bedford and some other years in California and Idaho. I teach at BCC, and I teach composition to first-year students. I have a certificate in Native American Studies, and that's kind of how the idea of rethinking history came to me, and part of the reason why social justice is so important to me. The other part is just leveling the playing field for people that I've grown up with and people I teach. Happy to be here. I'll pass it to Darcy, sorry.
Thank you, Stacy. I'm Darcy Lee. I am a native of Mattapoisett. I live in Fall River now. I'm the vice president of the Mattapoisett Museum. My day job is that I'm the executive director of Samaritans of Fall River, New Bedford, the emotional support and suicide prevention hotline. I will pass it to Nicole.
Hi, I'm Nicole Charbonneau. I am an 8th grade English teacher at Old Rochester Regional Junior High School, and I teach maritime literature and writing at Northeast Maritime in Fairhaven. I'm the GSA advisor at the junior high, the Gay Straight Alliance or Gender Sexuality Alliance, and I serve on the Bias and Sensitivity Committee for the Department of for the Massachusetts, MCAS committee, and I live in Rochester. I will pass it to, I see Katie Kirk.
Hi, everybody. I live in Mattapoisett. I just moved here a few years ago from Freetown. I'm actually a teacher at Apponequet High School. I teach environmental science and biology. I joined the YWCA book group, so I've seen Jordan a fair amount. And I've just been I'm just an interested community member, really, and teacher trying to educate myself and fill in all of the giant holes that are clearly there. So I'm just here to learn more. So maybe I'll pass it on to Melissa. If she's there, or Elizabeth. Those are the two names. Is anybody else?
Melissa's muted and Elizabeth isn't, but maybe they're.
Okay, maybe they're preparing dinner. That happens.
Okay.
It is that time.
It is. It is.
All right. So first of all, thank you all of you for participating in this. I know everyone's really busy. I just think it's so wonderful that we're having this conversation. And I think both books are really good, really interesting and engaging. Stamped, the one that we're reading, the YA one, I actually teach a young adult lit class for teachers. And that's going to be my whole class read for this year. Which will be really fun. And it's just wonderful that people are trying to learn and educate and sort of get the word out of all the good work that everyone is doing. And I also appreciate everyone taking the time to participate in a respectful manner with everyone, because I know some of the material it's difficult for a lot of folks. And so I think it's wonderful that we've been really working hard to do that, to make, as Jordan said, a brave space for everyone, which I think is really important. I actually used that this semester, Jordan, in my syllabi, so thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear.
Yeah. So anyway, I didn't know if anyone wanted to start with a question, or did someone have something that, if someone wanted to start with something, or we have some prompts that we can start with.
I believe Frances had a passage, at least to get us in the space of the books, because I know sometimes we read it a couple days ago or even a week ago, or it's just nice to talk about the actual text, right, to start with. So you picked something, Frances? Awesome.
I did. So from chapter 4 on page 44, regarding biology.
Which book is this?
This is from How to Be an Anti-Racist.
Okay.
So I'm just going to read the first 2 paragraphs of the chapter. I cannot recall her name. So very odd. I can recite the names of my Black 4th, 5th, and 6th grade teachers, but the name of my white 3rd grade teacher is lost in my memory, like the names of so many racist white people over the years who interrupted my peace with their sirens. Forgetting her name may have been a coping mechanism. People of color sometimes cope with abuse from individual whites by hiding those individuals behind the generalized banner of whiteness. She acted that way, we said, because she is white. But generalizing the behavior of a racist white individuals to all white people is as perilous as generalizing the individual faults of people of color to entire races. He acted that way because he is Black. She acted that way because she is Asian. We often see and remember the race and not the individual. That is racist categorizing, this stuffing of our experience with individuals into color-marked racial closets. An anti-racist treats and remembers individuals as individuals. She acted that way, we would say, because she is racist. So part of the reason why I picked that particular passage was it kind of was an interesting way of presenting biological racism, which I think is something maybe we don't quite always talk about. I know a lot of times when there is an incident with a person of color, sometimes that is used to describe the entire race. And we should also be aware that it's not good to generalize any one person's actions as representative of the entire race. So that's why I picked that passage, especially in light of what's going on currently this week.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because my daughter, who is really well versed in like the language of the like how we talk about race now, says that you can't be racist against white people. And so it's like, because you know the people who have the power, right, the cultural power, like the word racist implies like some kind of you know, victimization. So it's tough, right, Francis? Like, we all, like, I can feel the truth in that passage, and yet, and you see how the beliefs that you hold are so limiting, but like, how do we talk about that without seeming like we're angry or we're victims? Do you know what I mean?
I think the other thing too in that passage, especially in terms of who holds the power, it depends on the situation that you're in. Depending on the scenario, a person of color may have the power. But, you know, there are plenty of scenarios in our everyday life where that may be the case. So it's just something to think about. And it's something when I go out throughout my day, I kind of just think about that power dynamic in situations I am in. When I go to the doctor, who holds the power? When I'm in a store, who is holding the power? When I'm at the office, who is holding the power? When I'm running the meeting, I'm holding the power. But when I'm a member of the team, I may not be holding the power. So those are all things that the power dynamic changes throughout the day based on the situation I'm in.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Francis. And I think we see it every day in what we're doing. Just in my own life, you know, I went up for tenure last year. And without tenure, I had no power in my position. So I pretty much did everything because I knew, you know, and so it definitely changes things. It's very interesting.
I think that Kendi is good at looking at context too. He's really, you know, he'll give examples where that power dynamic does shift around, and your situation sort of determines how you express racism, almost even. You know, it's very contextual. It's I hadn't thought about racism at all the way that he describes it, honestly. So it's a really powerful read because of that.
Who here is reading or listening to Stamped as well? Just curious.
I've read some of it. I'm not sure where I am. I think I'm maybe halfway through it.
Yeah, same for me.
Okay. I know my sister has, because she's the one who, Nicole, she's the one who suggested it. And just because she told me, I'm reading Kendi's book, but I decided to listen to Jason Reynolds' book, because he's also a spoken word poet. And I just want to offer, if you have any reticent young people out there in your life, it is so much information packed in 4 hours in such a compelling way. And if you're even trying to plant a seed about how you've been taught history versus what history actually is, you know, and how we can rethink it, I really recommend the audiobook. It was so powerful. Really, really good.
Yeah, I think reading that, you know, I studied history in school, and it's one of these things that, you know, I'm learning. So, you know, a lot of this I've since learned since leaving high school and going into college and things like that. But like the first time that I heard about, I think he talks about, I forget the historical guy, Zerara maybe. And he talked about the Portuguese are the ones that introduced slavery into the Americas. And the first time I had heard that, I was in college taking a African American history course, and they started talking about that, and I was like, that doesn't sound right. I always thought it was the English that and I questioned it. I was like, no, you know, but no, it's true. So there's just all these little bits of real history that just isn't, you know, it's being glossed over, or it's not being touched on, that I think the book is really great for.
it's not deemed relevant, I think, is what happened. So it gets pushed aside. I didn't know about Linnaeus and his dynamic in creating race categories. I had no idea. And I teach biology,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, I just don't think it was deemed relevant. So,
Yeah.
they're not going to delve into that aspect of it, you know?
Sure. Well, and I also think when you're in high school, it tends to be, very glossed over history. It's covering what's maybe considered the main points, and it's usually like through rose-colored glasses and things like that. So I mean, there's once you I think get in the college level, you start being exposed more if you're taking history courses.
Certainly not science, though.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's really interesting.
That's really interesting.
Yes. So, then obviously science, is a very Western and rigid mode of thought. And, it's a very specific methodology. And to look at how it can be, look at how it's sort of pigeonholed into one cultural norm, there is really one fit. And I'm wrestling with that, and it's interesting.
It's a really good point that you bring up. I'm a biomedical engineer, and I work in the medical device industry. I've worked there for 20 years. And in my education, I had never learned about the work that was done on women of color to advance the industry. I did not know that until very recently.
Oh, so did you read the book that, what's the name of that book?
Henrietta Lacks.
Henrietta Lacks, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And other things as well, particularly the gynecological sciences.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Yeah, you don't learn that.
It's not in there. Yeah, it's very practical.
Mm.
Well, do you want to shift to one of the discussion questions?
Sure.
Like kind of a broad one. I don't even know if I need to share the screen because it's pretty simple, but it's just this idea. It's the book's central message, it says in the book club group, is that the opposite of racist isn't not racist. The true opposite of racist is anti-racist. The good news, Kendi writes, is that racist and anti-racist are not fixed identities. We can be racist one minute and an anti-racist the next. What does it mean to have to constantly reaffirm your identity as an anti-racist? Is there any benefit to the fact that you can't just decide you are not racist or an anti-racist and be done with it?
Sure, I'd love to jump in here because we recently we've conducted now a few trainings on whiteness and understanding whiteness and white racial identity and white feminism. So part of the way that I like to think about this and what we mentioned at the start of our last workshop that we did is you will never get a certificate for doing this work. Sorry, everybody, at the end of the book club, there's no certificate of completion. You do not graduate and become an anti-racist. And this is work that you and myself, right? No matter the trainings that I've done as part of my career and my learning, right? The trainings, the workshops, this is a lifelong journey. Every day I will commit myself to the work of anti-racism. And that's really what Kendi is calling on each of us to do, is to come to this work with humility and a way to ask questions and to really commit ourselves to doing the work, because it is not enough, right, to be non-racist. And we all need to reckon with our whiteness and particularly our proximity to power. And that puts us in a position that we must commit ourselves to this work every day for the rest of our lives. And with no graduation or certificate at the end of it. So that's something I've really taken to heart and continue to talk about in our work.
Because as we know, Jordan, our own president says he's not racist, right? I mean, the conversations I've had with people that disagree with even a a peaceful protest is that racism, systemic racism doesn't exist, and that person is not racist. And they don't understand why saying that is so problematic.
Right. One, I just heard this actually in a training I did, a national training I did last week, and I thought it was such a great way to visualize this, is so often we think of racism as the shark in the water. Racism is the water. And it's what we are living in every day. So it's like to fight that, right? It's not about like, well, if we take this shark out, we've got it. Like, no, it's the world that we live in. And it was such a great way to think about it. If anyone says that, you know, we don't live in a racist society. I mean, just as Kendi points out, there really are racist policies. Policies are either racist or anti-racist. And to think about even the history of white racial identity, that is when we had the first instances of policies that were passed that benefited whiteness at the expense of people of color. So, and that gets to Kyle and Katie's point too, about needing to unlearn this history. And it's a history that has been whitewashed. It's been predominantly written. I mean, right, who controls the power? The people with proximity to power to write the history books, to manage what gets written and what gets taught in the schools, and to think of the canon of what is taught. And it's calling on each of us to unlearn that whitewashed history. And it's a labor of love, and one we'll do for the rest of our lives. But to simply say systemic racism isn't real, I mean, that's a fallacy. And they're just, I don't know where they're thinking they live in.
I feel like I'm coming to understand that our existing normal is that systemic racism. And so to try to move the needle beyond or against that norm, or what's considered to be normal, which is the status quo, is really challenging, and is considered to be a negative thing because it's uncomfortable to move away from what has been, whatever policies and ideation have worked so hard to create as a normal. And so how do you explain that that's not normal when that's been your water? And how do you even recognize that as not normal? That's, I feel like, where I am trying to process.
I'd say that one of the best, I thought one of the most fruitful discussions on the Facebook group was when we started giving examples of historic policies that have actually been designed to benefit white people, white individuals at the expense of others, and they're policies that you learn in the history books without ever learning this side of the other side of what this policy was designed to do. So even thinking of Social Security and the individuals who were excluded, domestic workers and sharecroppers, I mean, who was running that? Those were Black women and men and women who were doing those jobs. And that was passed to bring white, Democrats over into supporting this legislation. So things like that, the more that we talk about them and expose the history of these policies is something, this is the work we all need to commit to doing. And I thought that was a great discussion when people started sharing other policies that they know have been historically designed, or they're racist in their designation, the way they were designed and implemented.
Something that I'd like to add too is that here we sit in the middle of a pandemic that has exposed how our healthcare system is systemically racist, how different people in different roles and jobs systemically racist. So I think that all we have to do is have the knowledge and the information about what is happening around us in our country to know that it exists. I think that this is hard work, that number one, some people don't believe that it exists. Number two, they wouldn't even consider working on something like this. And but I think that it's easier not to. If you're a white person who benefits from what happens in the country, then why would you try to get rid of that, which is really a horrible thing. I think there are many, many people who, well, that's probably painting with a broad brush, but I think that if we just looked around now, if people took the time to really recognize the populations and communities that this pandemic is affecting, then they would see that systemic racism is alive and well.
It's also really subtle, though, in some ways too, right? The systemic racism. So people that are denying it are probably people who have never had to experience it themselves, or people who see someone, like they only see racism when it's very, very explicit, like name calling, the N-word or something, right? But it's really hard, I think, for some people to see how it's not just the really explicit examples. And even when they do see really explicit examples, they'll be like, oh, it was an isolated incident. It's not indicative of like a bigger problem, right? So I think part of the hard work is trying to be really honest and help people connect the dots about policies, which I'm only starting to understand too. Like that is not something that I had put my brain space in, you know. The policy thing is like mind blowing. So I think helping people see that it's not just really explicit examples, but also implicit and subtle problems.
Yeah, I'll refer here to a quote where he says on page 9 in the introduction, "The only way to undo racism is to consistently identify and describe it and then work to dismantle it." And that really starts right by calling it out and identifying it when we see it. And that speaks to the, you know, the discussion post that we had about looking at policies and taking a closer look at policies and candidates and the syllabi that is taught in schools and what you've been taught in your own education. So I think that's really calling on each of us to do that. And I think part of this work too that I've personally been interested in is when we commit ourselves to doing the work of anti-racism, we really need to think about ways that we take this offline, because passive, you know, to be a passive ally, I mean, there's just no time for it. There's no time, no place. We're not interested in your passive sharing a post or getting into a one-on-one battle with somebody online. There are so many ways, better ways and more effective ways to involve in your anti-racism work, and we can talk about those strategies, but I mean, that's the first one. If you think that you're being anti-racist by sharing a post or by getting into a Twitter feud, like, I'm sorry, but no, we don't have time for that. People are dying, right? And we really need to think about our strategies for moving forward. And there are strategies we can all take within our spheres of influence.
Yeah, and I suppose, Jordan, that's such a good point. And Nikki, I love how you say that, because like my sphere of influence is storytelling, right? So in a way, just challenging the canon, like the literature canon that I grew up with, and probably you all grew up with, the dead white males that we read, like Charles Dickens, who I love. But just trying to recognize that for so long that there was these underrepresented groups, right? And so when you read the stories from the point of view of like an elder, a Navajo elder, for example, or like the author of Heavy, what's his name? Kais Lehman. That's a memoir about this African-American man. It's heartbreaking, but just like the more stories that we hear from underrepresented groups, the easier we can challenge our beliefs, right?
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's just a lot of denial. It's really hard to, when you've learned something and this is how things have been, and then, you know, we talk about being racist versus anti-racism, and there's just not good enough to say I'm not racist. It's easy to do that. It's easy to say, well, I'm not racist, and you know, what does that mean? It's, you know, I'm not actively doing this stuff, but when you're still part of it and you don't do anything to change it, or you stand by while something happens and not say anything, that that's not really anti-racist. It's not being not racist. It's you're still, you know, I think it's hard for people then to come to terms with that, to be like, oh, I've done that, and then you feel bad about yourself. But I think that's just a huge obstacle in getting people to realize what's going on. I think Stacy's got something there. No,
I'm much better versed on Stamped. I read it. Reading it is awesome too, because the font changes and it really is like awesome poetry, not history book, right? The audio's awesome too. But I really appreciate how Jason Reynolds was talking about, just like you were saying, Kyle, like it's an evolution, and even people who we see now, like Obama and Martin Luther King Jr., right? They did such awesome things to help society and to be a voice for the people, but Jason Reynolds doesn't shy away from being like, if you look at their speeches, a lot of times they're being assimilationists, right? They're like not even being anti-racist. They're trying to fit into this cookie cutter of what the hegemony, like what the white people will accept for being a black person, right? Like they'll only listen to me if I'm super educated. They'll only listen to me if I fit into the like this assimilationist cookie cutter mold. And I think that's really brave of Jason Reynolds to do. And I think it's really amazing too how even what we think now is anti-racist is gonna change, right? Because we thought Martin Luther King, and he was an amazing man, right? But we were like, wow, he was so awesome, but he still was not a perfect person, and he still was really assimilationist in a lot of ways. So I feel like it's a moving target, and it's fascinating.
Well, I think that's a really good point that you bring up too. I can't wait till we get to the discussion about colorism and internalization of a lot of these racist views by people of color, and regurgitating these types of thoughts and ideas to each other. So, you know, I know what it's like to move through the world as a person of color in white spaces, but it's also kind of like eye-opening to me when I'm in spaces with other people of color and realize that some of the things that I've heard or have been said to me are coming from internalization of these racist policies. So that's a really good point you bring up, Nicole.
Francis, do you mean like whether people recognize it or not when you're in circles with there are other people of color, they're like judgmental or like judging you or having like a hierarchy still?
I can only speak from my own personal experience, but my challenge has been mostly around colorism. So I'm Latina and I'm African. As a Latina, I don't speak Spanish fluently. I learned it in school. And sometimes I can be thought of or perceived as not Latina enough. And those are, you know, things that are internalized by people, or even around other Black people. I'm not very dark skinned. So sometimes I can be considered maybe not Black enough, or even the way I talk, the way I act. So there's hierarchies too when you get into these spaces with judgments going on that I think are, you know, based in racism.
Isn't that what chapter 1 seems to be about? Did I just interrupt somebody? Just Kendi's own reflection on his embarrassment of his high school speech, how he was basically spitting out the racism that he was steeped in his society, right? And he's just, the fact that he tells us what the speech was and what it said, and that he's so embarrassed, like, I guess because he's wrestled with it, he opened the door for us to talk about that as well.
I like that because he's making the space for everyone else to do the work too. You know, you start somewhere and you try to sort out what's going on internally. What have you internalized? Trying to process that, and then trying to find a way to move forward and be more anti-racist and do the work. You know, I almost found that self-reflection to be inspiring, you know. Well, I definitely found it to be inspiring.
I think what he shows us is that we live on a continuum, and so that no one starts out in the final place, and everyone has a starting point, and there are benchmarks along the way and experiences along the way which show you new opportunities, but you keep moving, and you don't. You hold yourself accountable, but you don't, you're not judgmental about yourself. I mean, I thought in all of the ways that he moved through and talked about himself, he was non-judgmental and really modeling a way that we think about and forgive ourselves as we think about and forgive and interact with other people. So his journey really instructs me.
Oh, for those of you who don't know Lee Heald, would you introduce yourself, Lee? Because we did that before you got on.
I'm sorry. I'm Lee Heald. I run the AHA program in New Bedford and have for many years. Stacy was the leader for a long time, so we've known each other for a while. I just got off another New Bedford call, a park call. But I also want to say I'm also the president of the Library Trust in Mattapoisett. And so we have just purchased enough books of stamps, like a collection of stamps, so that you can use them for your classroom. And we've purchased enough copies of How to Be an Anti-Racist so you can use them for your book club. And there are clumps of copies. I look at Darcy Lee, we're in the same, one of the other same book clubs, and we've just read How to Be an Anti-Racist as a club. So all of the books are there, and they have to be, I mean, we kept thinking it's a 5-day COVID. So, I mean, if you're a teacher and you're on a Monday, Tuesday, you can use them as a Monday, Tuesday kind of thing. And if you return them, or when you're done, you return them on a Wednesday, and then by the next Monday, they're ready for the next class to go. So I think that there are many libraries in the system which would also support that kind of purchase. So.
Oh, 12, okay. Does anyone have any other pressing questions, comments, or observations? Anything they want to talk about? I could look at the...
I think Nicole's talking, but or she
Hey,
yelling
I
at
was on
kids.
mute. Oh, I was so excited about what I was saying, and I was on mute.
No.
Thank you for recognizing that.
Yeah.
I don't have a question, but I did want to harken back a little bit to Stacy's original point about how people are often crying like reverse racism or something, right? So there's 2 points, I guess, that I'm going to try to articulate. I totally want to help people see that, sure, you can be prejudiced, like, you know, but it's not the same as being like they're being racist toward me. You know, if I were a white person, someone's like, well, they're being racist toward me. No, they might be being prejudiced toward you, but it's not the same as being racist, right? Because of those policies that exist and like who's holding the power. However, one of the things that I loved about Stamped, the Jason Reynolds one, and I'm sure Kendi does that in his book too, is that there are points at which Reynolds is talking about, you know, power policies and how things were grossly unfair. But then he's like, yeah, but we're pretty awesome at the same time. And how like there's this celebration in the midst of this horror, and about how people were, it wasn't like the Underground Railroad, like white people were allowing people of color to be free. They were freeing themselves, right? And there were like other points throughout history, like the civil rights. It's not like all of a sudden white people gave black people power, like black people were working to free themselves. And I feel like the core of that Stamped book and the celebratory nature of it all made me really happy, because it's kind of easy to be like just talking about the negativity, you know, and like the lack of power, when really there's so much to celebrate in culture. And I just think it's a really important point too.
Definitely. I don't know how many of you have read Just Mercy or even seen the movie Just Mercy. Brian Stevenson is a force. I think he's one of our national heroes. And he says the same thing. He leaves his anger, right, and his emotions aside because he's so honored to continue this work. There's an interview that he did with John Lewis. It's like a 20-minute TED Talk. And you're right. I think it's about hope too. Hope Through History is another podcast I'm really interested in. I just started listening. Brene Brown recommended it. I don't know how many of you like her, but her work about courageous leadership. But yeah, I mean, framing it as, it was the same thing with Native Americans. Like I was teaching the story for several years, almost as if Native Americans were victims. And then you rethink it, and people pointed out to me, you know, there's books called We Are Still Here. Like the story is continuing, and it's vibrant, and it's alive right now, right?
So I don't know the rules. Are we talking about the whole book or just the first part?
It's the midpoint check-in, so however far you are in the book is fine.
Well, I don't want to be a spoiler.
Oh no.
Have you read it? Has everybody read the whole thing? So what I really loved was his, I was in awe of his last chapter. And I've seen interviews with him because I think he's a really interesting speaker and interesting person. And someone said, how could you write the book you did? And he said, when I was finishing this up, I had stage 4 colon cancer, and the survivability is 18%. And I thought by the time this was published, I was going to be in my grave. And so I went for it. I said exactly what I wanted to say. And I just felt the courage of that moment. So few of us actually just let it all go, in not a nasty way and not an angry way, but there are rare occasions when we say exactly and precisely what is on my mind. You know, I mean, and I admired that so much. And I think it would be fabulous not to have to be with a death sentence of cancer for people to fess up and step up and be present in that amazing way. So if you haven't read that chapter and you're about to stop, go to the end, read that chapter. It'll make you finish the whole thing.
And what about in our community? I mean, is anybody wrestling? I mean, most of us are from the Tritown. So are you wrestling with even your own proximity to this movement? Or like, for example, I look around and all my neighbors are the same color, you know, now.
Right.
It was not always that way. And does it matter? I mean, am I part of the problem because I live in the suburbs? You know?
Well, there was this poll that just came out. It's NPR and another organization that's talking about how white Americans are least engaged with what's going on, you know, with everything that's happening now. And it talks about things like these book clubs like this, and how just white Americans are just not as engaged as other groups and other communities. And one of the things that in the article that I read was just people were just like, well, what can I do? You know, and I think a lot of, I feel that. I mean, what can I do? Just on a day-to-day basis, like you're out there, you know, I'm doing this, but what can we all do? Especially being moved, you know, being like I mean, I think it's like a 98%, at least in Mattapoisett, it's 98% white. I mean, it's.
You can vote.
Yeah, but you can vote, yeah.
But,
I do that.
And make my kids vote. My kids don't get to come home unless they vote. You know, I mean, that's really true. You can vote.
Well, maybe it goes back to power. And I know you're going to say something, Jordan, but Kyle, you are doing something by reimagining what the museum is going to be representing. Sure. So.
Right, but I think for most people, it's just like, this is going on now. But how can I stop this, or how can I make this better? And I'm just guessing. I mean, but I think a lot of it is that people don't know what they can do or how even, say, voting is going to make a difference. You know, they don't see that immediate change.
Right. I think you mentioned something here that's really important, and I hope we'll launch this community read and the group and the work we're doing with Tritown Against Racism into some really exciting action steps, because yes, I can't stress enough the importance of voting and completing your census, but also we need to have more transparency with our local candidates. I think the time is right to figure out ways and develop ways that we can actually have questionnaires and really examine who our local candidates are when they are running for office, create a system that hands out endorsements that are based on a commitment to equality and equity specifically. But more than just the political sphere too, well, actually this does connect to politics, but in my experience, and my mother has dedicated her entire adult life to working in affordable housing, there is never a bigger issue that calls out white people's hypocrisy than housing. And I think that's something that our group can really, mention here and to think about as we commit ourselves to anti-racism work within the Tritown, is to really critically analyze and take action steps about how we address housing and affordable housing in the Tritown. And this also connects to our candidates and the individuals who run for office. The Boston Globe on the 21st, this was just last week, and I can put this in the chat. One of the ideas that was published was called "Housing Will Test White Support for Black Lives." And the caption was, "It's one thing to rally against racism, but will white people finally make it feasible for many more minorities to move into their neighborhoods?" And when you have zoning policies that prohibit multifamily housing, when you have these arguments that you've heard constantly that it will be a drain on our schools, well, as I believe it, isn't a school in Mattapoisett potentially closing because there are not enough children? I mean, our towns could be in crisis if we do not have more children in our communities. And I think that's something we need to call ourselves to commit ourselves to and talk about a reckoning, right? If you want to be an anti-racist, are you comfortable having a Black neighbor and having Black children at the schools in the Tritown? And we need to commit ourselves to doing that work. And I'm excited. There is movement on this, and I'll be happy to keep reporting it, but people are committing themselves to not let this go. And I'm confident it will impact our local elections going forward. So stay tuned, but I think that's just one area that we really need to call on ourselves, all of us, about how we interact with those intersecting themes or areas of study. Like, yes, we've been talking a lot on education, particularly through Tritown Against Racism. We've been talking about the school committee and decolonizing the syllabus and the hiring, the hiring, and then the retention and cultivation of teachers of color. And that's fantastic. Like, I love that focus, but there's more we can do too. And we need to think about the hiring, recruitment, and the policies like that with our police forces, and particularly with housing as well. So I'm curious what others have to think about that, but we can't stop here.
I thought that was really good, Jordan. So I'm so glad you said that, especially since I wouldn't have been on the school committee or elected if it wasn't for the support of Tritown Against Racism and the members of our community. Another way that we can help too is to support Black businesses. A lot of Black businesses were left behind during the pandemic. They did not have access to a lot of the funding available, or they got their access extremely late in the game. And there's an opportunity to patronize Black businesses locally. So that is another way to help people out, and they pay taxes and they contribute to the tax base that we use to fund our schools and all of our other services. So it's really critical that they're successful.
I hope too we can also be more comfortable. So, right, I will say, before Tritown Against Racism formed, I would have been very nervous, anxious to bring up some of these issues that we talk about. And I say that because I see in our community Confederate flags, and I know what they symbolize. And I find those as dangerous and threatening when I see them. And with having this group now that is formed, particularly through Community Reads and through Tritown Against Racism, I hope that we can all feel also more supported, more connected. It's bringing community members together who are committed to this work to call out racism when we see it and to commit ourselves to doing the work. So thinking about something like a Confederate flag, symbolism that would make and does make children of color feel unsafe in those schools, we need to call that out for what it is. That is not a microaggression, that is racist abuse, as Kendi says, right? And we need to make our schools and our communities much more committed to calling it out and having zero tolerance for that. As Kendi states, I love that. Like, we need to commit ourselves to zero tolerance for racist abuse in our community. And not just say, oh, that's the way it's always been, or oh, that's not what you think it means. Like, I know exactly what the Confederate flag means when that is driven around the Tritown.
So I love what you just said, Jordan. I'm not sure, because of the way history is taught, that everyone knows what the Confederate flag really means. Does some teenager think, oh, I'm going to put it on the back of my truck and I'm going to go four-wheeling in the mud because I'm a rebel, right? So I think that it goes back to people, you know, what I was trying to say before, that people either don't know. If they know, they want to deny for a lot of reasons, out of fear, out of maybe not having the right words, I think fear is a lot of it. If they call somebody out on racism, what are people going to say about whatever is in there, you know, whatever it could be that they're thinking of. So, but I do think that people don't really, I hate to bring it back to education, but I think people are not educated on what these symbols really stand for. So, yeah.
Yeah, you bring up the flag and kids not knowing. I remember growing up in school, there were boys, they would have the Confederate flags on their cars or on their lockers, and that was their whole, I'm a rebel. That's why they did it. And I don't remember what I thought about that, but I mean, we had the Dukes of Hazzard growing up, you know. So it was there, and it was like, it's okay because these guys are heroes, and they were rebels too, you know. They, you know, not in the Civil War sense, but in the, you know, we're good guys going against the law to help people out, and so that's, you also get that symbolism kind of embedded into, you know, especially kids growing up. So yeah, they don't really know what that really means. And I also think it's the way history, I have history books that used to belong to my grandfather, who was a big, you know, he read a lot about the Civil War, and one of them was on Robert E. Lee. So the other day I sat down just to see what the introduction, it was like, just talking about how passionate it was and how he believed in this, and so many people, you know, died for, you know, and, you know, but not, you know, we're looking at it differently than we used to look at it, and that's a good thing. But I think it's that long, you know, going back to how history has been taught, and that's why it's hard for people to come to terms with what this really means, or what this really does symbolize.
Kyle and Darcy, I so appreciate your points here. And one of the things that I'm sure many people have seen when they are following on social media is, and particularly this, I think, came out with the op-ed about that was against teaching racial equity in the schools in the Tritown, if everybody can recollect when that op-ed came out. And there were many comments that this work begins at home. And I think we really need to challenge that, because when people say it begins at home, that's a conversation ender, because it's very hard to counter that narrative. But it has to be all throughout the community. It has to become the water the water we swim in, that is committed to anti-racism, and to talk about those symbolisms. And this can be through the local churches here. Like, let's ask all of the places that we do, interact with within the Tritown to commit themselves to this work and to have these conversations. Because I don't think if we count on it just happening at home, this is where we are now. And to see, I mean, people are dying. We can't just say, oh, we trust you to do it at home. It's got to be so much a fabric of our community. And I love one of the comments too, and gosh, you can think about this, right? Of the 3 children who were in the car when Jacob Blake was shot in the back 7 times, that Black children are not too young to experience racism, but white children then cannot be too young to learn about it. And part of that then, right, that can be stuff you do at home, but it can also be ways that can be incorporated into preschool curriculums. And I know this work is actually happening right now in New Bedford, which is very exciting. So I encourage all of you with young children, go pick up your copy of Antiracist Baby. It is so fantastic. And your children are not too young to be talking about this and thinking about it. So they can, yeah, just a thought.
Well, our hour is just about up. I love that. Sarah, is there something that you?
No, I was going to say that I appreciate what everyone said. I also did want to say a lot of it does start at home, but it's also very hopeful for me where I've spoken with young people who have had these hard conversations at home and have said, I disagree with my parents about this, because that is very difficult to do. And they've come and, we've had conversations. Well, no, my mom or dad didn't want me to go and to do this or to do that. But I said, no, they're wrong and I'm going to. And I think that things you can get it's hopeful with that because there is this community support, that younger people are more comfortable saying, no, I disagree with you. We should have this conversation. So that I think is really great. And I also wanted to say you should listen, if you're interested in policies, you should definitely listen to the podcast, Nice White Parents. It's awesome. It talks so much about segregated schools and de jure segregation. It's really good. I highly encourage you to listen to it. It's fascinating about in New York and Brooklyn. So definitely listen to it. I'll put it in the questions. So that was just it. Go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
No, I'm just cognizant of everyone's time. So final thoughts and comments. Since we're a small group, maybe we can weigh in. And by the way, this is quite flexible. Katie and a couple of you just joining who we don't really know very well. After that protest happened on June 5th, and like 500 people were marching through Mattapoisett. It was the first protest, I'm ashamed to say, that we've ever had, except I'm proud to be a part of it. So after that, the question was, what can we do next? So I think that just by asking that, if we continue to ask that question, and I wrote down all your action steps because we were invited to appear on Good Morning Wareham tomorrow. And the host is from Tanzania, and her name is Queen Banda, and she is awesome. I just watched an episode of it today. Did any of you know that there was a live show called Good Morning Wareham? Francis knew. So what's next for us? We had talked about having a panel discussion when the books are through, hopefully in person. Some people were doubtful. I'm still hopeful that we can do that somewhere. And do you know any community leaders, or would you be willing to serve on the panel? Or do you have other ideas about what we could do when we're done with these books? I'm just leaving that out there. For a minute, you can answer now, or you can get back to us on the Facebook page. Yeah. Okay. So think about that. Think about what we can do next as a group. We all know that Margaret Mead quote. Lee, do you know it off the top of your head? The one about a small group of people can change the world, and in fact, it's the only thing that ever has. I'm paraphrasing to somebody.
Well, it's something about a small group of dedicated people
Yeah.
are the only thing, and it's the only thing that's ever changed the world.
Yeah. So, so thank you for being here and for being willing to be a part of this discussion. Any final questions or comments from anybody?
So my one thought, I mean, I always think system-wide and structurally, it's me. So, I mean, if there's a teacher institute, I mean, they're going to be doing teacher education or training or whatever on Zoom. I think that that would be a really interesting opportunity to think about trying to put together a panel because it's both welcoming because people are reading the book. And I think the idea of a Tritown one book read is fabulous, and thinking about ways to support people in education and reading and whatever. I wouldn't go as far as Jordan in the changing the housing and this, that, and the other, because I think that that's really too much. That's a big bite of the apple. But I think that thinking about a reading program and a conversation and getting this group bigger, I think you might find some traction in one of those, like a PDP thing, because teachers need PDP. So even if this group doesn't have the PDP ability to get that done, someone like Lee Blake or UMass, I mean, there are lots of places to get the PDP credit. And I think that this is a particularly relevant topic, and you might find a lot of traction in widening the circle and the awareness and getting people credit for kind of having this conversation and talking, which kind of motivates people. Sarah's
That's
making a funny face.
Yeah, no, that's a really good idea. I will talk to some people. I might be able to get us the PDPs. So.
Because there are lots of people in New Bedford. I mean, Gail Forts is doing a lot of conversations with this in the Antiracism. Lee Blake is doing a lot of stuff. I think that there are scholars in the UMass system who would be willing to share content as well as process. So, I mean, I think that that's an open conversation that you could really get going. I would also, I'm also on the board of Mass Humanities, in all fairness. I mean, I have to say that I'm about to step in and be the chair of the program committee. So yay, one more thing, it's so fabulous. So they have these things called discussion grants, and you can get $3,000 for the discussion grant with very little encumberment of what you're doing. And so as a nonprofit, like the museum could do it, Darcy, as part of the Tritown Read, you could put together a program that says we want to do a discussion group, the Tritown group on racism, this group, and sort of say, and we're going to open it up to teachers, and we're going to have a PDP, and you could use part of that discussion money to not only pay speakers, but you could also use it to incentivize and pay teachers. And you could use it to buy books.
I looked into that discussion grant when we first talked about doing this, but I think it had just closed, so we just missed it.
Yeah, it's 3 times a year. So ramp up and get ready to go. They're also because it rolls, you know, it just rolls. And there's also the thing you just missed because it closed. We're about to give out the money. Is there was a whole the CARES Act has been dumping money into the National Endowment and the Mass Cultural Council, and we got a chunk of it. And we gave out money, $5,000 or less, to people who were underrepresented audiences. So it was people of color, LGBT, marginalized communities, cultural groups without voice. You didn't need to have a scholar. And so you got to watch the website because there's a lot of stuff like that that would really suit this kind of opportunity to think about having some funding. Anyway, so there you go. Those are my.
Thank you. So we're okay. So we have a lot to think about. and hopefully we will see you all at the wrap-up celebration that we're going to have. Keep reading. Reach out to anyone if you have any questions, and thank you all so much. It's really great to see all of you. It's been a lot of fun and learning so much.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Sarah,
thank you.
Can I ask
Thank
you a question? Can you stay on for 5 seconds so I can ask you a question?
Oh yeah, sure.
Bye, Nick. Love you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you,
Bye.
Jordan. You're amazing. You're
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you all.